This is Frank, a 40-year-old farmer from the northeastern region of Ivory Coast. Along with 20 other participants, he came to my workshop with a tiny glimpse of hope to find a solution out of rural poverty. When I said to him that I didn't bring him a solution, he looks at me and says, "I knew you were just another white empty promise wasting my precious time." So, I'm here today to tell you why I am a waste of time. Don't leave the room, guys. I will also tell you why Frank changed his mind. So, essentially, Frank is right. Despite decades of development aid and cooperation, and billions of dollars flowing into the African continent, almost half of the population is still poor. And what I find even more shocking is how much of African development is still financed by external money and aid. And besides all the graphs and bubbles and indexes that we kind of come up with about poverty, do we still ask ourselves the question of why Africa cannot help itself? I feel like that by focusing on analyzing complex problems of poverty and development, we forget to think about what it actually means to be dependent on someone. What being dependent on external aid means and does to humans, what it does to societies. So, as I stand in front of Frank, I am a white, privileged Western woman in front of a black, poor African farmer. I find it important to spell this out loud because by realizing what I embody by being white and the effect this has on the other, mainly the non-white person, has made me understand a lot of what I should and should not do and believe as a white person working in West Africa. The perception of white supremacy is still at the core of most of the relationships of Africa and the outside world, and especially its donors. And by not naming it because we as white people are uncomfortable hearing it, I think that we really fail our job. So, as a white, Western, and privileged woman whose heart thinks and beats with Africa, I think we need to rethink development cooperation. We need to start with Frank. So, if we are to start with Frank, why don't we ask him the question of how he feels like if there's constantly someone taking on the front seat in his life? We finance your cooperative because it worked elsewhere. Plant a tree because it will restore your ecosystem. Hey, use democracy because in Europe it's a fantastic form of governance. Quite naturally, no matter how well intended, this relationship will lead to a loss of willingness and ability to create solutions to make and shape your immediate environment. So, without creation, a society doesn't really create anything. A society eventually becomes a recipient of input instead of a creator of output. To me, this is the moment a society loses its soul. It loses its citizens. So quite logically, no matter what you put into that society, nothing sustainable or anything can really come out of it, right? Because something in the middle has died. So going back to the workshop in rural Ivory Coast, I want to talk to you about another workshop participant, Madame Koulibaly, a 60-year-old female farmer who is illiterate. She came up to me talking about her hopeless struggle to sell her agricultural products in the rural areas, as to a lack of infrastructure, a lack of market information, and price fluctuations, and many, many, many other things. Basically, everything is shit. Well, so I couldn't really tell anything. I couldn't say anything. 4 hours later, Madame Koulibaly and her group of other women present the very first home delivery service for agricultural products in rural Ivory Coast, which works without financial aid, but through the pooling of personal networks, through the union of farmers' associations, and the creation of a harmonized offer. Wow. How did we get from absolute hopelessness to this in just 4 hours? I tell you why. Creativity. Creativity is the ability to imagine yourself in a situation differently from what immediately meets the eye. Without creativity, I cannot imagine what my product looks like other than the one I have in front of me. I cannot imagine who my client could be other than the persons that I already see. So, by the very nature of development aid, development cooperation, call it as we may, and the dependence resulting from it, we have killed African space for creativity. So people have to reconquer and redesign this space for creativity. And so one way to get there is design thinking. Simply speaking, design thinking is a process of creative problem solving that allows anyone who is not trained as a designer to use the tools of a designer's toolkit, like empathy or experimentation, and create concrete solutions to a problem he has defined that is feasible, desirable, and viable. We know this methodology generally from startup circles or innovation networks. But what is interesting is that the very principles of the method of design thinking can actually be applied and found at the core of our problem of aid dependency. So, a design thinking process has loads of different phases, but one phase creates empathy and focus such that you actually really understand the problem that you want to tackle and take ownership of this issue and the solution that you will create afterwards. A second phase uses brainstorming and ideation to stimulate your creativity to think beyond the obvious and think outside of the box in the process of creating your solution. And another phase makes you create a very simple, concrete test version of your solution very quickly and immediately go back to the end user for feedback. This is actually an experience of collective intelligence to arrive at a concrete solution. This is the moment of tension. Frank is back. As you know, he wasn't really happy in the beginning. Well, after 4 hours of design thinking, he came up to me and said, "I'm sorry, I did not trust you, but you gained our confidence by showing us once and for all we need to take our future back into our own hands, and that we can actually create solutions ourselves." By engaging citizens all over Ivory Coast in 8 workshops, 6 workshop facilitators inspired 150 farmers and youngsters to retake ownership of their own situations and contributed to the emergence of 25 concrete citizen-driven solutions for the agricultural sector. 4 out of these 6 workshop facilitators were young locals that never facilitated a design thinking workshop before. Tomorrow, these 4 can train 10 others in design thinking methods to inspire a movement of engaged citizens solving the challenges of their country. So, does this mean design thinking is the magic bullet? We got it. All the problems of Africa are solved. Honestly, when I first arrived in West Africa, I did not believe in the impact that creativity and collective intelligence could have on the poorest, very remotely living and illiterate populations that I encountered. But bit by bit and workshop by workshop, all the doubts and questions that I had vanished when looking at the people coming out of the workshops that we organized. So design thinking is so much more than just a method of challenge solving. Design thinking can actually be a method that helps us really completely reshape and rethink development cooperation by putting development back into the hands of those concerned, citizens. So, to start this rethinking, I would like to end with 3 main points. First and foremost, I think that we need to actively counteract the omnipresent and so misleading picture of the rich, European, educated person that comes to help the poor African, uneducated person. This is why I try my utmost to take on the passenger seat. And I also try not to be that annoying passenger that kind of says, like, go to the right, go to the left. No, I try to keep back. And I think that in the face of past and current failures of development aid and development cooperation, I must be more humble, more passive, and constantly self-critical of what I bring to Africa. Being a workshop facilitator is an ideal way of learning this. Secondly, the results that come out of creative processes and citizen engagement will not reflect what we judge good or just. When regaining their creative space, citizens will develop their entrepreneurial models, their forms of governance, and eventually their African utopia. We have to stop, once and for all, make our aid conditional on our ideas, even if this idea is called sustainable development. Last but not least, design thinking can actually be just as powerful of a tool for any actor in development cooperation, be this NGOs, institutions, companies, governments, by making us explore multi-stakeholder collaboration or engaging citizens in donor countries in completely different ways with problems of the African continent. With the philosophy of design thinking at heart, any project can accelerate active citizen engagement. If we really believe in Africa's emergence, we have to believe in its people and their ability to make choices and design solutions. And we have to be more humble about what we propose. And with design thinking, a powerful tool to engage citizens along the way is right at hand. So once regained their creative space and their space for citizen engagement, I'm utterly optimistic that African societies will be good ones, that will manage to transform their beautiful culture of joy of living, redistribution of wealth, pride, and so many other communitarian values into fruitful, sustainable, and above all, inclusive societies. Thank you very much.